Mr. Sergeant at Arms, would you please introduce the Governor of the great state of South Dakota?
Thank you. Members of the House, members of the Senate, friends and family in the galleries, and the people of South Dakota that are listening and viewing this, please welcome the Honorable Governor Dennis Daugaard.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. You're outstanding. Thank you all for being here today. To begin, I'd like to recognize two new legislators. First, Doug Bartel. I appointed Doug this summer to replace Don Hager as the District 10 representative. As you know, Doug spent his career in law enforcement, including 12 years as Sioux Falls Chief of Police. He was here last month and sworn in prior to the budget address. But let's welcome him again. Doug, where are you? There he is. Welcome. Second is Mike Dietrich. I appointed Mike last month following the loss of our friend Craig Teason. Mike is an attorney and an experienced legislator, having served 3 terms in the 80s and 90s. I really appreciate his willingness to serve, especially on just such short notice. Please join me in welcoming Mike Dietrich. Today, I'd like to look back at some of the things we've accomplished together over the past 7 years and also update you on some progress. And I'll also offer some new proposals to consider this year. I'd like to start today by talking about workforce. This is a significant long-term challenge facing our state, and I've personally spent a lot of time on this over the last year. In March, the National Governors Association sponsored my visit, along with several other governors, to Switzerland and Germany to learn about their long-standing work-based education programs. In June, I met at the White House with President Trump, Ivanka Trump, the U.S. Secretaries of Labor, Commerce, and Education, and several of my fellow governors. There, the President signed an executive order to encourage development of apprenticeship programs. And last fall, I was pleased to be named to the President's task force on apprenticeships. Also in June, I began a 1-year term as chair of the Western Governors Association, and I've selected workforce development as the policy focus for my 1-year term. The WGA held workforce summits in Sioux Falls, Denver, Oklahoma City, and Seattle. And next summer, South Dakota will host our annual meeting in Rapid City. Through all of this, I have seen 2 interrelated problems in South Dakota. From the perspective of businesses and employers, our state does not have enough workers in many skilled fields. And this is a barrier to economic growth. We have companies that do not expand or that turn away business because they cannot hire enough skilled workers to do the work. Almost any business owner will identify workforce as a significant concern. But we must also see this from the perspective of our young people. We want them to receive an education that allows them to find well-paying, fulfilling jobs here in South Dakota. We have an excellent education system in our state, but we must help all of our young people achieve this goal. So how are we doing? First, some national perspective. It's clear that post-secondary education is important in today's job market. When I graduated from college in the early 70s, post-secondary education was not especially common. A few years ago, a Harvard University study entitled Pathways to Prosperity looked back to 1973, about that time. At that time, nearly 3/4 of jobs were held by workers with a high school diploma or less. In 2016, Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce issued a report, America's Divided Recovery, which found that only 34% of jobs are now filled with employees with a high school diploma or less. And this trend toward workers with more than a high school diploma began in the early 2000s and has recently accelerated. And jobs for those with no post-secondary training are trending down even faster. Georgetown's report showed that in the 6 years after the recession ended, the economy added 11.6 million jobs. 11.5 million of them, or 99%, have gone to workers with at least some post-secondary education. Those with a high school diploma or less gained only 80,000 jobs, less than 1% of those jobs. Looking at it another way, this graph from Georgetown University shows first the loss of jobs during the recession and then the recovery of jobs. The shaded area on the left shows the recession from December 2007 to January of 2010. The blue line shows jobs held by those with a bachelor's degree or more. The numbers show, as you can see, slight gains and losses during the recession, and then when it ended, 8.4 million new jobs were added for those with a bachelor's degree or higher. The orange line shows jobs held by those with an associate's degree or some college short of a bachelor's degree. You can see about 2 million of these jobs were lost during the recession. This is the orange line, lost during the recession, but regained afterward, plus 1.1 million more. The green line shows jobs held by those with a high school diploma or less. About 6 million jobs were lost during the recession, and those with a high school diploma or less have regained only 80,000 of them. So given this, we want our kids to graduate from high school and then pursue some post-secondary education. And these are things we're already encouraging. So again, we have to ask ourselves, how are we doing there in South Dakota? To help us understand what's been happening, last spring I asked our Department of Education to look at ninth graders who enrolled in high school in 2006, 10 years ago, to see how they fared over the next 10 years. Why 10 years? Well, it takes most students 4 years to graduate from high school, and some students graduate college or tech schools in 2 years, some in 4, some in 5, and some might take 6 years to graduate. Most of the rest have quit by that time. So let's look at 10 years. Our best data is for students in public schools. We had 10,513 ninth graders enter high school in South Dakota in the fall of 2006. Now, to make the numbers easier to follow, we'll talk about 100 of them as representing the cohort. Of those 100 ninth graders, 23 did not graduate, leaving 77 high school graduates. Of those 77 graduates, about 2/3 of them, 52, entered some kind of post-secondary education. Some began a 2-year program, some started a 4-year program. Less than half of them completed their program in South Dakota by 2016. So 6 years after they began, less than half had completed. So thus, of those 100 ninth graders, less than 1/4 of them persisted to complete a post-secondary education effort within 10 years. Now, some of the others have found or will find success through directly entering the workforce and succeeding there, or joining the military, or through transferring and graduating from an out-of-state institution, or some other means. But many of these will not find the success we want them to find. Now, this situation is not unique to South Dakota. It's a problem seen across the nation. Colorado has a chart like this. It's almost exactly the same as ours. Ours is a little better. California has a similar chart. Now, one piece of good news is that South Dakota is getting better, Our high school graduation rate is improving, and at the post-secondary level, the state universities are very focused on improving retention rates through graduation. Our best technical schools have a graduation rate over 70%. So we are improving. Still, we have a long way to go. Too many students still do not complete their post-secondary efforts. Among young people who do pursue additional education after high school, many are unaware of which educational pathways lead to skills or credentials which are in demand and qualify a person for a good job. 2 summers ago, I hired a high school student to do some work at our farm. He was a good student, hardworking and respectful, with good grades. I asked about his plans after graduation. He said he was going to enroll in a private university to major in psychology. Tuition, room, and board at this school amounts to about $90,000 for 4 years, and that's if you graduate in 4 years. And mind you, these days, only about 1/4 of the students who enter a 4-year degree program graduate in 4 years. Later, I asked this young man to lunch and provided him with New York Federal Reserve data showing poor job prospects for psychology majors, with those few jobs paying $25,000 or less. I also showed him that the number of psychology majors is huge, with much competition for the very few jobs available, and he was very surprised. He had no idea. He said, "This is disconcerting." That's a quote. This is disconcerting. Now, you know that's a smart kid, right? He was right. It should be disconcerting. And I'm not saying a psychology major can't be successful. Some employers require a bachelor's degree in any field as a prerequisite to applying. And many young people with social science degrees go on to graduate school. That's what I did. But young people need to know this information when they're making these decisions, before they make these decisions. Now, we've taken several steps to improve this situation through an effort we're calling Career Launch. We're encouraging high schools to expand the availability of work-based education experiences such as apprenticeships and internships or job shadowing during school. The best way for young people to learn about careers and find fields they like or don't like is to experience them. In addition, these work experiences help our young people learn how to arrive on time, how to dress appropriately for the job, how to interact with coworkers and customers. And with fewer students holding jobs while in high school these days, work-based education experiences may be the best way, or even the only way, to learn these foundational skills that every employer expects of every employee. Let me give you an example. In Yankton, many high school seniors plan their schedules so that their traditional classes are compressed into half a day, either the morning or afternoon. During the other half of the day, the student works at a paid internship with an employer in town. The student receives high school credit, paid at least $11 an hour, gains exposure to a career field, and learns those foundational skills I just mentioned. This month, we're piloting Career Launch with 4 school districts: Sioux Falls, Rapid City, Yankton, and Brookings, that have already taken some steps in this direction so that we can learn from them and help them move forward as well. We hope to expand this effort in the future to more districts. Assigned personnel will help schools coordinate with employers to add work-based learning experience opportunities, and they'll also supplement a school's career counseling services so that young people receive more information about career fields and education pathways. Here's one example. Last month, I joined an announcement in Sioux Falls of a partnership among Dakota State University, Southeast Technical Institute, the Sioux Falls School District, and the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation. Through this partnership, high school juniors and seniors will take dual credit courses in cybersecurity, network services, or software development. These dual credit courses will count toward their high school diploma. The courses will also count as stackable credentials toward college credit. Students can earn a certificate from Southeast Tech, stop there, or go on to an associate's degree, stop there, or go on to a bachelor's degree at Dakota State University. Students will also have the opportunity to work in a local business using their course training. The Department of Labor will be working with Dakota State and Southeast Tech to create a registered apprenticeship in these technology fields. This is an example of the type of work-based education that I hope will take root in South Dakota. I'm particularly excited about this. When I was in Switzerland, I saw many students in high-tech apprenticeships. We need to change the notion that apprenticeships are confined to the construction trades, such as electricians or plumbers or carpenters. Apprenticeships can offer a pathway for training in many career fields. We're emphasizing training in these cyber fields, not only because of in-demand, well-paying jobs, but also because it's a strength of Dakota State University. Dakota State announced last summer a generous $30 million gift from Denny Sanford and Miles and Lisa Beacom. And this gift to the Beacom College of Computer and Cyber Sciences will keep Dakota State a national leader, where it's already a center of excellence designated by the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security. New programs, scholarships, and a new research facility are all being added. Of course, the gift to the Beacom College is not the first time that Denny Sanford has made a major donation to advance workforce development. In 2014, he donated $25 million, which the state matched, to launch the $50 million Build Dakota Scholarship Fund. Now in its third year, approximately 300 students annually receive full-ride scholarships to attend a technical institute. These students enroll in a high-need program and promise to work in South Dakota after they graduate in fields like precision agriculture, automotive, surgical technology, robotics, electrics, or nursing. Nationally, over the past 4 years, enrollment in two-year institutions is down nearly 11%. In South Dakota, though, during that period, technical institute enrollment is up 2%, and in Build Dakota programs, up nearly 10%. The first Build Dakota scholars graduated last fall, and today 208 recipients are working in South Dakota in a high-need field. Another important opportunity for high school students is the state dual credit program, now in its fourth year. You've heard me say it many times, dual credit is a win-win-win. Students win because these are the cheapest college credits they will ever buy, and they get a head start on college or tech school. High schools also win because they can expand their course offerings at no cost to the school district. Universities and tech schools win as well. Although we do ask them to discount their tuition rate, this program attracts more South Dakota students to our institutions, retains more freshmen after the first year, and helps graduate students on time. Last year, 2,224 high school students took at least one dual credit course from a university. Another 934 took a technical institute course. The pass rate is excellent, over 90%, and the cost savings are substantial. Last year, these students saved an estimated $5.3 million compared to the tuition rate they would otherwise pay. This year, I'll propose to update the state dual credit statute and to clarify the manner in which the students, the institutions, and the state share the cost of this program, and I hope you'll support that legislation. As I mentioned, I've made workforce policy my policy initiative for the Western Governors Association, and I invited U.S. Secretary of Labor Alex Acosta to participate in our first summit in Sioux Falls. When he was here, he asked me as WGA chair to promote another issue that is a priority of the Trump administration, and that's streamlining professional licensure. The Trump administration is concerned that professional licensure standards hurt the economy by creating a barrier to entering many professions. Licensure can also make it difficult for professionals to move because each state has its own licensure requirements. Clearly, professional licensure plays an important role in protecting the public. No one wants to be operated on by an unlicensed doctor or have one's house wired by an unlicensed electrician. But we must be sure that licensure isn't used to keep qualified workers out of the market. I reached out to the governors of North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, and all expressed an interest in a reciprocity compact for professional licensure. The idea is simple. If already licensed in one state, a professional can move to another member state and practice for 18 months, enough time to earn a license in that state if one chooses to do so. This year, I'll ask that you pass a statute to create this compact and to create reciprocity with any other state that also enacts it. The hope is that a number of Western states will establish this compact, which then can spread to other states as well. I'd like now to speak about education. 2 years ago, we enacted the recommendations of the bipartisan Blue Ribbon Task Force to increase teacher pay and reform school funding. I'm pleased with the progress to date. In the first year, average teacher pay in South Dakota increased 8.8%. We saw sizable salary increases across the state, in small districts and large. In fact, some of the largest percentage actually happened in small districts. In Faith, average teacher salaries increased 24.7%. In Waubay, they increased by 26.4%. In Leola, average teacher salaries increased by 28.7%. I've heard from many superintendents that these increases have improved their ability to recruit and retain teachers. And although certain geographic areas or fields of study are more difficult, we have improved the situation greatly. I'm also pleased with the progress we've made in transportation. 3 years ago, this body passed a comprehensive highway funding bill, which generates $85 million in new annual revenue for roads and bridges. The measure raised the gas tax by 6 cents a gallon and increased the motor vehicle excise tax and license plate fees. I'm happy to report that the new money is being put to good use. The state has awarded 298 construction contracts amounting to $750 million. These projects have encompassed work on 6,078 miles of state highway and 172 bridges. Many of these projects would not have been possible. Many of these repairs would not have occurred without this new revenue. One example of a project is the Highway 100 project that will connect the east side of Sioux Falls to Interstate 90. This continuation of a Sioux Falls corridor will improve industrial and commercial mobility and sustain expected growth over the next 20 years. This is the largest highway contract in state history, and the completed highway will be owned and maintained by the city. Bridges can also be expensive for local governments to maintain, which is why we included a provision in the bill to create the Bridge Improvement Grant Program. The first project to replace the driving surface on a bridge in Davison County was completed last fall. 37 more bridge projects should be under construction in 2018. In addition, another 100 bridge improvement grants have been made for hydraulic analysis and structure selection. No one likes tax increases, but it's less expensive to maintain a good road than to rebuild a bad one. As Ronald Reagan said when he proposed a gas tax increase in 1982, the bridges and highways we fail to repair today will have to be rebuilt tomorrow at many times the cost. It reminds me of an old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. On our farm, when I was a boy, we always had a big garden, and we ordered plants and seeds by mail from Gurney's in Yankton. With every order, Gurney's would always enclose a bonus item as a gift. One year, our bonus was a hackberry bare root seedling, only about a foot long. My dad and I planted that seedling, and now, 50 years later, it's strong and tall. Here's a picture of that tree today. Before us come so many issues: deferred maintenance, highways, criminal justice, teacher pay, that can't be solved in 1 year, but a start must be made. We could kick the can down the road, but the problem would only worsen. And so we must do what we can with bipartisan support and without regard to politics. These things require patience, persistence, and attention to small details. It's a conservative approach, being a good steward of the state and its assets. When I was running for governor, I promised to analyze state-owned property and right-size or sell unneeded assets. Looking back in the 1800s, when South Dakota became a state, we housed people with mental or physical problems in large, state-owned institutions, often for life. We built big state hospital campuses in Yankton, Redfield, and Custer, and elsewhere. Sadly, many people were often sent away and forgotten by their families. We now know that in most cases, it's better to serve our citizens in their homes and communities, often through community-based providers. But the state has continued to own these large old campuses decades later. Some of the buildings, when I took office, were still being used, but others had fallen into significant disrepair after being vacant for decades. It's irresponsible to let vacant buildings fall in on themselves, and also irresponsible to spend taxes maintaining unneeded property. It's better to return these properties to the tax rolls. We began to address this in Yankton at the Human Services Center. We demolished several dilapidated buildings, sold land that was no longer needed, and negotiated a lease purchase with the local historical society to preserve the historic Meade Building. That restoration, funded by charitable gifts and local taxes, is near completion. We've addressed this problem on other state campuses, selling surplus property in Redfield, Custer County, and Minnehaha County. We sold the Plankinton Training School campus to the for-profit company that was leasing and operating it. And the Board of Regents is exploring options to better use the School for the Deaf campus in Sioux Falls. This philosophy extends to current state buildings as well. We must properly maintain them so future governors and legislatures aren't left with more rundown buildings. Together, we've set a goal of appropriating 2% of value in maintenance and repair of state buildings in our budgets, including university buildings. This year, I'm proposing to add state-owned technical institute buildings as well. Due to our budget situation, we can't quite get to 2%, but it needs to remain a priority, and we need to make a start. Beyond maintenance, through our own captive, we now insure all state buildings and have made safety improvements, such as the new fire protection system in the Capitol. When I took office, this building was uninsured, for example. Many state buildings were uninsured. While preserving our physical assets, we're also keeping South Dakota on sound financial footings. We passed a constitutional amendment explicitly requiring a balanced budget, and we've structurally balanced our budget every year that I've been in office, honestly. We've improved many financial practices, placing them in statute and putting more financial information online than ever before. We've maintained reserve funds of at least 10% of general fund expenditures, and when we had excess reserves, we used them to prepay debt. I'm very proud that we've kept our pension fund fully funded, one of just a handful in the nation. The trustees of the South Dakota retirement system have led the nation in their innovative reforms to protect the pension plan long term. These sound practices have earned South Dakota a AAA credit rating, the highest possible from all three major rating agencies. We should all be proud of this. We can also be proud of the work we've done to preserve and improve South Dakota's outdoors and natural resources. We created Good Earth State Park, which is a significant not only for its natural beauty, but for its historical and cultural significance to Native Americans. Our state buildings are more energy efficient, and our redesigned governor's houses use less energy. Our new buffer strip program has begun to increase natural grasses to improve water quality and create even more wildlife habitat. And in the Black Hills, we completed a multi-year effort to fight the mountain pine beetle, opened a new beautiful visitor center in Custer State Park, and improved other facilities. On the interstates, we're also refurbishing rest areas and creating welcome centers at our borders to welcome more visitors to South Dakota. And to return to the analogy of planting trees, over the past 7 years, we have literally been planting trees. On the Capitol complex alone, we've planted more than 500 trees, and in our state parks, thousands more. Among our state parks, our crown jewel is Custer State Park. And I want to talk for a moment about the recent fire. On the morning of Monday, December 11, the fire broke out near Legion Lake, and over the next 2 days, dry conditions, warm temperatures, and high winds drove the fire over 54,000 acres, making it the third largest Black Hills fire on record. Despite the arduous conditions, we were very fortunate to have our own seasoned Type 2 incident team based in the Black Hills to lead the response. We could not have responded as quickly or as effectively without our own South Dakota Wildland Fire Type 2 team. Professional and volunteer firefighters from across the state and region responded to give aid. Local ranchers and Custer State Park staff all contributed. When high winds caused the fire to jump containment lines, firefighters, emergency responders, law enforcement, and park staff went door to door to help families evacuate as the fire pressed at their heels. More than 340 firefighters worked that night or in the days after to protect primary structures. Thanks to the efforts of all involved, no lives were lost, no one was injured, and no homes or primary structures were lost. All 175 houses in the area were protected, and the farmers, ranchers, and local residents all had a home to which they could return for Christmas. A fire can sometimes be healthy if it clears unwanted undergrowth, and in many areas, that's what happened. Thankfully, the buffalo herd and wildlife were largely unaffected. We did lose fencing, most of our winter pastures, and some stands of timber, but new fencing is being built. Some of the buffalo moved to an unburned area, and we're buying some hay. We're also working on a salvage timber sale to capture some value from the burn. Custer State Park reopened just 11 days after the fire started. This could have been much, much worse if not for the hard work and heroic efforts of our firefighters. It was South Dakota at its best. People from all across the state pulling together in a time of need. Please help me thank them now. Last summer, you met in special session to address non-meandered waters, a contentious issue in South Dakota since the 1990s. Past legislative solutions had been elusive. The situation came to a head last March when the Supreme Court said it was, quote, up to the legislature to decide how these waters are to be beneficially used in the public interest. You heard that message and went to work, and the Open Waters Compromise you passed is already working. Today, more than 99% of all non-meandered bodies of water with managed fisheries are open for recreation. That small red sliver on the chart there. This is not just a win for South Dakotans who enjoy fishing and boating. The owners of the ground under these waters have demonstrated their support for the compromise by keeping nearly all of these waters open. And this process has created a new dialogue among sportsmen and landowners, which has been positive for all. During the special session, the adopted bill included a provision to sunset the law this June so that the legislature could consider whether it was properly working. But I believe that the law is working, and I'm introducing a bill for your consideration to extend the sunset date by 3 years to June of 2021. That will give the new system more time to work before we consider opportunities for improvement. The Open Waters Compromise is one of many instances in which a bipartisan effort has solved a problem, and that's what South Dakotans expect of us. They want problems solved. They want elected officials to be ethical, transparent, and accessible, and they want opportunities to participate in their government. Throughout my time in office, I've taken these expectations to heart and have tried to make efforts in these areas. Through our revamped OpenSD website, the public can easily access state financial information and see the same financial metrics that I see every week. We launched the Boards and Commissions portal, which is a one-stop shop site for meeting notices, agendas, and information previously difficult or impossible to find. Another website, sd.net, has dramatically increased availability of live streaming for public meetings. Still another, the Administrative Rules website, helps citizens follow the rulemaking process. This body has also done a number of things to advance transparency and accountability in state government. Last year, you took up many ethics measures to codify the concepts of Initiated Measure 22 that were supported by South Dakotans. Public servants from West River and East River on the right and the left, and in the legislature and executive branches, came together to pass these bills. A total of 9 replacement measures were passed. Under these new laws, legislators, statewide elected officials, and agency heads are prohibited from accepting expensive gifts from lobbyists. New whistleblower protections have been created for state and local employees. Legislators and high-ranking executive branch officials who leave state service may not lobby for 2 years. Campaign funds may not be used for personal expenses or transferred to a personal account. And a new accountability board has been established to receive ethics complaints, initiate investigations, and refer criminal activity to the Division of Criminal Investigation. In July, I appointed 4 retired judges to this board, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Better government is about more than accessibility and transparency, though. It's also about efficiency. Today, you can go online to renew your driver's license, apply for a pardon, search and apply for state jobs, look up the status of an inmate or a parolee, see the restaurant health inspection scores, compare your take-home pay to other states. State government has apps to buy hunting and fishing licenses, explore travel destinations, see road conditions. Agencies are using social media to spread information more quickly and to directly communicate with South Dakotans. We offer GIS maps to help the public find land for hunting, locate recycling facilities, pinpoint oil and gas wells, determine lake levels, identify water bodies eligible for buffer strip protections. More and more and more can be done online. We know, however, that online shopping has made it more difficult for our state to collect sales and use taxes. Our state has been at the forefront of the national efforts to solve this problem. We continue to hope that Congress will address this problem, but in the meantime, 2 years ago, this body passed Senate Bill 106 to require online sellers without a physical presence in South Dakota to collect and remit sales tax. Since then, over 100 companies like Amazon have come forward to do this voluntarily. Other retailers, though, challenged our ability to collect these taxes, and we knew they would, and that case is working quickly through the judicial process. This month, we expect to hear whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court will take up our case. The National Governors Association, the Tax Foundation, the National Retail Federation, the American Farm Bureau Federation have all joined South Dakota and 35 other states in urging the United States Supreme Court to take up the case. We can't know how they may rule, but we can be proud that South Dakota has been a leader in addressing this national issue of tax uniformity. Let's hope, for the sake of South Dakota businesses, the problem will finally be resolved. As we continue our efforts to address online sales, we're also encouraging more business and more opportunity for our state. Let me tell you about just a few of the many good things happening in South Dakota. Last July, we broke ground on the long baseline neutrino facility at the Sanford Underground Research Facility. This experiment will fire a beam of neutrinos from Fermilab near Chicago to huge detectors at the Sanford Underground Research Facility in Lead. The experiment hopes to unravel one of the great mysteries of the universe, the oscillation of neutrinos, but you knew that.
Psychology.
Yeah. You psychology majors do, anyway. Ho! This experiment will require a $400 million construction investment in Lead that will have an impact of nearly $1 billion. South Dakota also continues to be a destination for millions of visitors. Every year since 2011, tourism has set new records for visitor volume and visitor spending. Since 2011, our visitor volume has grown from an estimated 12.5 million visitors to 13.9 million visitors in 2016, with a corresponding increase of $450 million in visitor spending. I'm also very excited about South Dakota's emerging biotech sector. Last year, SAB Biotherapeutics broke ground on a new facility in Lincoln County. SAB Biotherapeutics is well known for developing the world's first large animal platform technology to produce fully human polyclonal antibodies. You knew that too. These human antibodies are aimed at prevention and treatment of human ailments like cancer, autoimmune disorders, and infectious diseases. The facility in Lincoln County will be the first of its kind designed specifically for cattle and will allow SAB to extend and expand its capabilities, herd, and team for production of life-saving technologies. Overall, 2017 was a great year in terms of economic development wins. The Governor's Office of Economic Development helped facilitate deals that total over $735 million in investment, and they're expected to create more than 1,400 new jobs in South Dakota. Today, I'm pleased to share that AgriPure Cooperative, a leader in the North American dairy industry and producer of a wide variety of dairy products, is pursuing plans to expand their Lake Norden cheese plant after an extensive multi-year site search and review. The $250 million expansion will substantially increase daily milk processing in Lake Norden to eventually triple the capacity of the plant and requiring 125 new full-time employees. Once fully operational, the AgriPure expansion will have just over $1 billion in estimated annual impact to the region and state. We project it will support more than 90,000 additional dairy cows. Last May, we also broke ground on a major new ag processing facility in Aberdeen. AGP's new state-of-the-art soybean processing facility highlights our emphasis on adding value to our ag products by processing them within our borders. AGP's investment will create 50 full-time jobs and have a substantial economic impact. Understand the scale of this. The facility will eventually process the equivalent of 20% of our state's entire soybean annual crop, which will extend beyond Aberdeen and benefit farmers by opening up a new market and increasing the price for their soybeans. These are just two of many 2017 success stories. There are many more. In Sioux Falls, we supported Gage Brothers, a 100-year-old South Dakota manufacturer, as it launched a new $40 million facility. We supported Balcons Enterprises to construct a new 22,000 square foot processing and warehouse facility in Elk Point to add 22 full-time jobs. In Beersford, we secured a commitment from Hendricks Genetics to build a $25 million commercial turkey hatchery, creating 79 new jobs. This facility will hatch over 500,000 turkeys each week. It's great news for Beersford and for other communities in South Dakota, and we will see another $40 million of investment and another 48 new jobs from the associated laying barns. We've also supported our advanced manufacturing sector through assistance to Rapid City-based VRC Metal Systems, which uses cold spray material coating technology jointly developed by the School of Mines and the Army Research Lab. VRC is renovating a vacant school in Box Elder to house its new manufacturing and office space. They plan to create 60 new positions by the end of this year. There have been many other business expansions, including Otter Tail Power in northeast South Dakota, Red's All Natural Foods in North Sioux City, B9 Creations in Rapid City, Applied Engineering in Yankton, Performance Pet in Mitchell, Great Plains Processing in Yankton, Aero Trailers in Watertown, and Harvard Integrations in T. We're seeing success because South Dakota allows businesses to prosper. We have a low tax burden, no corporate income tax, no personal income tax, no business inventory or personal property tax or inheritance tax, and we also have low costs and reasonable regulations. And we've been diligent over the past 7 years about removing red tape. In fact, since 2011, I've proposed and you have approved the elimination of over 4,600 sections of obsolete or unnecessary laws and rules, accounting for more than 515,000 words. And we're proposing more of those bills this year. One area where regulation continues to stifle economic development is microbrewing. South Dakota statutes limit the ability of our homegrown craft breweries to grow and thrive. Current law caps microbreweries at 5,000 barrels per year. Compare that to Montana's cap of 60,000, Wyoming 50,000, North Dakota 25,000. Again, South Dakota 5,000. And in addition, South Dakota does not allow an in-state microbrewery to sell its product directly to a retailer. Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa all allow that. This year, I'm proposing legislation to make us more competitive with our surrounding states so this emerging industry can continue to grow. Moreover, South Dakota's alcohol laws were written over 80 years ago after Prohibition ended, and they have been amended many times. The statutes in this area are a mess, and in many cases, they just don't make sense. I'll be supporting several bills this session to streamline and modernize these statutes so they make sense for a 21st century economy. One of the most important steps we've taken in economic development over the past 7 years has been the creation of the Building South Dakota program. I spoke to you last month in the budget address about my proposal to strengthen this program. And I know many of you want Building South Dakota to have a reliable, ongoing revenue stream so these grant programs can be sustained. My proposal is an improvement over the current system, which relies on volatile revenue sources and which is too complicated. As I explained last month, my budget proposal takes the approximately $3 million per year in contractors' excise tax that's currently diverted to Building South Dakota and instead directs that money back to the general fund. Then I'm proposing that we allocate $3 million, the same amount, in general funds, into the funds that make up Building South Dakota. The Housing Development Authority would commit another $1.5 million for the next 5 years, adding $400,000 annually from the Private Activity Bond Fund as well. This would bring a total of $4.9 million in ongoing funds to be spent in turn in the general appropriations bill for Building South Dakota programs. This proposal would eliminate the 5% stream of dollars that's currently allocated to the Ready Fund, and we'd reallocate the dollars instead to the 4 remaining funds: the Housing Opportunity Fund, the Local Infrastructure Fund, the Workforce Education Fund, and the Economic Development Partnership Fund. Now, if we make these changes, these 4 funds will exist in the General Appropriations Act each year rather than relying on a complicated side statute. This will make it easier for legislators to weigh the relative benefits of each fund and to allocate future revenue increases as our needs change. Governor George S. Mickelson is remembered for his efforts to bridge gaps between Native Americans and non-natives. Governor Mickelson called on South Dakotans of all races to focus on areas of agreement, which led to successes in tribal tourism, healthcare, and small business development. During my time in office, I've tried to follow Governor Mickelson's example, and I visit reservations to meet with tribal officials every year. In recent years, the Department of Tribal Relations has facilitated partnerships among state agencies and the 9 tribes. We now have tax collection agreements with 8 tribes and gaming compacts with 8 tribes. In 2016 and 2017, the Department of Game, Fish, and Parks signed cooperative memorandums of understanding with the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe, the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, the Oglala Sioux Tribe, and the Flandreau Santee Sioux Tribe to improve communication and management of wildlife and lands. And the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has dedicated millions of dollars for the operation and maintenance of tribal drinking water systems. In corrections, we've implemented a tribal parole program with the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. That's been very successful. And leaders in Flandreau are working on a proposal to start a similar program for the Flandreau Santee Sioux Tribe. I value the intergovernmental relationships the state has with the tribes and the Native Americans who call South Dakota home, and I hope we can continue to progress in these areas. One issue that's important to all South Dakotans, including our tribes, is infant mortality. When I was first elected, I was shocked to learn how many infants were not reaching their first birthday. South Dakota's infant mortality rate was higher than the rates in surrounding states. I asked my wife, Linda, to work with a group of doctors, nurses, tribal healthcare workers, social workers, and Department of Health officials to understand the causes of this problem. In their research, they found that deciding against early elective deliveries, abstaining from tobacco, learning safe sleep practices, and receiving prenatal care are critical to an infant's well-being. Now, if you know Linda, you know she's someone who gets things done. Once the task force identified the problems, she began to work towards solutions. She joined the former First Lady of North Dakota, Betsy Dalrymple, to request that all of the birthing hospitals in the Dakotas reduce early elective deliveries, and they listened. Every birthing hospital in South Dakota agreed to do so. Checking this off the list, Linda moved on to something a little tougher, tobacco use. She worked with the Department of Health to redouble efforts to reach more pregnant moms with resources like the 24/7 Quit line, and the new data looks promising. Since 2011, we've seen smoking during pregnancy decline by 19.5%. Linda has also traveled the state to promote safe sleep practices. Thanks to her, even I know the ABCs of safe sleep. Infants need to be alone, on their backs, in a crib. She's gained donation to Cribs for Kids, a program that provides safe sleep kits to families in financial need. Through Linda's advocacy, more than 9,200 new parents and caregivers have received these cribs. After 7 years of Linda's work on this issue, I'm happy to report the latest data shows more South Dakota babies are celebrating their first birthday, with only about 4.8 deaths per 1,000 live births. That's our lowest rate ever for infant deaths. Please help me thank Linda. Good. I would take the tobacco Thanks for helping me out there.
Point, Governor.
Point. It's been nearly 1 year since Donald Trump became our 45th president, and the new administration is giving states more flexibility in administering federal programs. One recent example is in Medicaid. The Trump administration recently indicated that for the first time, it's willing to consider work requirements for Medicaid enrollees who are non-elderly, able-bodied adults. I've asked our State Department of Social Services to pursue a waiver so our state can require people who receive Medicaid to work if they're able. Keep in mind that in many other states, Medicaid coverage has been expanded to add many additional adults. Now, in South Dakota, Medicaid covers only children, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and very low-income parents. Work requirements may only apply to a subset of that last category, very low-income, able-bodied parents who aren't already working or caring for a child under 1. That's approximately 4,500 individuals. I propose to pilot the new requirement in Minnehaha and Pennington counties, where there's the greatest availability of employment and of training resources. We'll use the same services that we already require for those on unemployment to help participants find jobs. And for those families whose income goes up, we'll provide interim resources such as child care assistance and premium assistance to support families as they transition off Medicaid. As we wait for approval of the federal waiver, we'll begin a voluntary program for participants in July. Work is an important part of personal fulfillment. There's a sense of pride that comes with having a job to do and being able to provide for your family. By making this adjustment to our Medicaid program, we can continue to help those who need it the most and start to connect those who can work with jobs that give them that sense of self-worth and accomplishment. Another issue that requires hard work over a long period of time is drug abuse. Last October, President Trump declared the opioid epidemic a public health emergency. According to the White House, in our country, drug overdose deaths now outnumber fatal crashes and gun-related deaths combined. with 175 Americans dying each day. Fortunately, South Dakota's prescription drug overdose death rate remains relatively low, where we rank second lowest in the nation. That's good. Still, every one of these deaths is a tragedy, and the overprescription of opioids is something we have seen in our state. In 2015, for instance, the number of opioids prescribed in South Dakota would have been enough to medicate every South Dakota adult around the clock for 19 straight days. Now, some solutions require a top-down approach. Last year, you passed legislation that requires pharmacies to enter painkiller prescriptions into a statewide database within 24 hours. That legislation also requires participation by prescribers of controlled substances in the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. In 2015 and 2016, we put new laws in place to increase access to naloxone, which is used to treat opiate overdose. As of the end of December, the state has purchased and provided 807 doses of naloxone to first responders. There is no legislative fix, however, that will completely solve this problem. We can't mandate away addiction, and we need healthcare providers, private organizations, law enforcement communities, and individuals to all play a role. It's been promising to see South Dakota's healthcare systems provide additional guidance to their providers on when to prescribe these drugs, and it's having an impact. The State Medical Association is doing its part as well by developing resources for physicians to recognize and treat opioid addiction and prescribe opioids appropriately. They'll be holding in-person and web-based educational sessions starting this month. The Board of Pharmacy, partnering with local pharmacies, is establishing permanent sites throughout the state where anyone can dispose of certain expired, unused, and unwanted prescription drugs. The service is free and anonymous with no questions asked. In 2016, we established the South Dakota Advisory Council on Opioid Abuse. Its strategic plan supports developing medication-assisted treatment capacity. This approach uses medications in combination with behavioral therapies to provide a holistic approach to treatment. And this year, the Advisory Council will be working to raise public awareness about the risks of recreational opioid use through a media campaign and school-based opioid prevention activities. We also continue to wrestle with the methamphetamine problem in our state. On the prevention front, the Department of Social Services has funded more than 245 presentations in communities and schools with thousands of people hearing their message, and the Attorney General's Office has also undertaken an education campaign. Additionally, this month, prevention resource centers will complete a meth prevention toolkit for communities. For the most part, we're seeing less meth manufactured in homegrown laboratories. It's more often manufactured on a larger scale and trafficked into the Midwest. The Drug Interdiction Task Force, made up of DCI agents and highway patrol officers, has been hard at work over the last year to stop meth from coming into our state, and we need to continue to do more to choke off these distribution channels. For those who are severely addicted, the Department of Social Services is working to expand and increase access to treatment, ensuring treatment is evidence-based and that providers are equipped and trained to provide intensive treatment models. We've recently seen some hopeful results in substance abuse treatment. In 2017, over 69% of individuals entering treatment for substance abuse completed successfully, compared to the national average of only 44%. Employment rates at discharge were 9% higher in South Dakota than the national average as well. This meth epidemic has had a profound impact on our criminal justice system. It's been 5 years since the passage of the Public Safety Improvement Act. Juvenile reform legislation followed 2 years later. The impetus for both was the belief that we could do better. For adults, South Dakota had a higher imprisonment rate than any other state in our region. Per capita, we are locking up 75% more men than North Dakota and 4 times as many women as in Minnesota. 81% of new commitment admissions to prison were for nonviolent crimes. Among juveniles, South Dakota had the highest juvenile incarceration rate in the country. It was nearly 3 times the national average. At the same time, our juvenile violent crime arrest rate was approximately 1/3 of the national average. Again, we are locking up primarily nonviolent juvenile offenders. In the years since those reforms, we've seen progress in dealing with nonviolent offenders. Our drug and DUI courts have expanded capacity. Our community-based treatment programs have been enlarged, and we're seeing more probationers complete successfully. Still, we can yet improve. It's important we always turn a critical eye toward past policies and be willing to adapt to changing conditions. We should always be willing to be smarter today than we were yesterday. When we first passed the adult criminal justice reforms in 2013, no one foresaw the influx of meth that has occurred in South Dakota and in other Midwestern states. Last year, in response to the meth epidemic, we passed legislation endorsed by the law enforcement and state's attorneys that requires jail time for those who use drugs while on probation or parole, mandatory. We also expanded the availability of 24/7 HOPE probation for drug offenders. And after hearing from school leaders that juvenile reforms had made it too difficult to enforce truancy laws, we passed legislation to give schools and law enforcement more tools to use in response to truancy. Just as with workforce, we should always strive to improve. We also need to recognize there have been huge positive changes as a result of the reforms. Functional family therapy, which offers treatment for the entire family to address juvenile issues, is available in every single community in South Dakota, and we're seeing positive results from this treatment. To date, 346 families have successfully completed this therapy, and 88% of these families have reported a positive change. In the adult system, capacity in specialty courts like drug and DUI courts has nearly quadrupled since the passage of the reforms. And South Dakota's substance abuse treatment and criminal thinking completers have a lower recidivism rate than the overall DOC population. Overall, 23% of individuals released from prison return within 12 months. I'll say that again. 23% of individuals released from prison return within 12 months. But that rate is only 10% for those who complete this cognitive substance abuse treatment, and only 5% for those who complete moral recognition therapy. Juvenile justice reforms were enacted in 2015. At that time, as I mentioned, South Dakota had the highest rate of commitment in the nation. I know we all hear concerns from law enforcement and school leaders concerning the juvenile reforms. That's why we made some of the changes we did last year. But when someone tells you the reforms aren't working, we need to understand exactly what is the problem and what policy change might address it. A broad brush is insufficient. The statutory purpose of the juvenile justice system is rehabilitation, and we must never lose that focus. I spent 20 years working at Children's Home Society, which operates institutions for children who have suffered abuse and neglect. Often these children have behavioral problems. At Children's Home, our priority was always to do whatever we could to return children to their families, or if that was not possible, to a foster or adoptive family. I know juvenile offenders can be difficult, but we need to remain focused on what is best for them. Locking up children because they're difficult to deal with is not acceptable. Putting a child in an institution away from the community is incredibly disruptive to the life of a child. We must reserve institutions for children who pose a risk of harm to others. Our system has always allowed for that, and the juvenile reforms did not change that. In fact, juvenile commitments to state-run facilities have been falling in almost every state in the nation over the past 18 years. Nationwide, placements fell from 40,678 in 1997 to 13,970 in 2013. In South Dakota, they fell from 315 to 102 before the 2015 passage of juvenile reforms. Now remember that those reforms passed in 2015, most of them became effective January 1 of 2016. If you add the prior year, 2015, our placements had fallen farther still to only 48. A juvenile who commits a violent crime can be committed to the Department of Corrections, and a judge can also commit a child who's found to pose a serious risk of harm to others. Beyond those cases, we must continue to build our capacity to treat children in their communities, near their homes, families, and schools, wherever possible. For most children, as for most adult offenders, this offers the greatest chance of true rehabilitation. Before I close today, I'd like to say a word about the South Dakota National Guard. In 2017, 401 soldiers and airmen with the South Dakota National Guard served overseas. Soldiers with the 153rd Engineer Battalion returned home in September after serving a 10-month deployment to the Middle East. Today, right now, 109 of our soldiers and 96 of our airmen are abroad, serving in the Middle East, Romania, and other parts of Europe. Last year, we had 11 state active duty missions, including wildfire response, security support for the presidential inauguration, assistance to Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, and the Airspace Control Alert Mission, which serves to protect the country from any type of emergency, including acts of terrorism. I'm proud of the South Dakota National Guard. It continuously distinguishes itself. For example, South Dakota leads the nation in unit readiness. The National Guard Bureau, the national level of the National Guard, annually designates superior units based upon personnel strength, training completion, and inspection marks. Last year, only 35 Army National Guard units in the nation were named superior, 35 in the nation. 2 were from Iowa, 10 from Virginia. The other 23 were all from South Dakota. Yeah. Because of their service and the sacrifices of all who have served in the military, we can meet here today to chart the course of our state's future. And so it's fitting that we've added a reminder of that service to our Capitol building. Last summer, we moved our state's Hall of Honor, which commemorates South Dakota's Medal of Honor recipients. We moved it to the Capitol's first floor. Formerly in the Soldiers and Sailors building, it was not as visible and it was not accessible to those with limited mobility. One of these mornings, when you arrive early, I hope you'll pause to read the incredible stories of each of these men who represent the very best our state has to offer. Finally, now, I'd like to say a few words about our state's farmers and ranchers. It's been another tough year. After seeing a lack of moisture in the spring, we declared a statewide emergency in June and activated the State Drought Task Force to assist producers. The drought persisted throughout the summer, and at one point in August, 97% of the state was abnormally dry, with more than half in severe or extreme drought. Drought conditions exacerbated the impact of low prices over the last few years. 27 looks to be near a low in terms of farm income. Our economists are hopeful of some marginal improvement this year if production levels increase, but improvement will depend upon the weather, of course, and in part on federal trade policy. Even though we don't know what this year will bring, there's still reason to be hopeful. During the good times, our farmers and ranchers invested in themselves. Farmers adopted new technologies and upgraded their equipment, added grain storage and other new facilities. Our ranchers also invested in new equipment, fencing, and corrals, along with better genetics. Those investments have positioned them to seize opportunities when times are good again. We continue to see success under the County Site Analysis Program that helps counties identify sites conducive to ag development. 54 of our 57 counties that asked to participate in the program have had their analysis completed, and the remaining 3 are currently underway. In August, we broke ground on upgrades to the Animal Disease Research and Diagnostic Lab, which we approved last session. This lab produces critical research and diagnostic support to protect our livestock industry from disease outbreaks. The expansion ensures the lab can address the needs of producers when they need it the most. Agriculture is the foundation of our state's economy, and it always will be, because of the generations of resilient individuals who gave their all, working the land, combining until dark, calving at 2 in the morning, getting up before dawn to milk, and feeding livestock in sub-zero temperatures. These hardy leaders grew the industry to what it is today, and they will bring us through the next year and the years to come. Even when times are tough, we have many reasons to be hopeful. We have it good in South Dakota. There is no better place to live, work, or raise a family. No better place. South Dakota is a state where people can succeed. If you show up and work hard, you can make a good life for yourself here. This is why Site Selection calls South Dakota the #1 state for achieving the American dream. We have a high quality of life, an abundance of outdoor recreation, safe communities, good roads, good schools. We have one of the best safe drinking water records in the nation and a stellar clean air record. Every South Dakotan can be proud of this state and of the many things we have accomplished together over the past 7 years. Balancing the budget honestly every year, securing AAA status, raising teacher pay, investing in our roads, bridges, and railroads. But our work is never done. Every challenge is an opportunity to improve, and we must always seek to leave this state a little better than we found it. This is my 22nd legislative session and my final State of the State address as governor. Linda and our 3 children, Laura, Sarah, and Chris, are here, and I'm grateful for their support through all these sessions and through all the elections to earn the privilege. I love you. I'm grateful to my sister Joyce and her husband George for driving from Minneapolis for this, to Linda's sister Mary and her whole family who've helped me. Budgets and policies and bills and operations are certainly important to me, but nothing in comparison to their importance to me. Thank you for being here. My first legislative session was in 1997. I've enjoyed the 6 years I served in the Senate and then 8 years as lieutenant governor and starting my 8th year as governor. I've met great people, just great people, and I feel good about the part I played. We've dealt with some tough issues together. I tried to do what I thought was right. You've been great to work with. The first State of the State I attended was in 1997 when Bill Janklow was governor. I was out there for the very first time listening to him give this speech. If you knew Bill, you know he did not have much respect for showboats or attention seekers. He didn't have a lot of patience at all sometimes. But I still remember, and I looked back and found something he said in the 1997 address. He said this: "The public doesn't care about all these dramatic moments where people take these great stands that will be forgotten in 8 minutes after it's been on the evening news. They don't mean anything. They literally don't mean anything. I'll tell you what means something. 10 years from now, when you look back on your tenure and I look back on mine, did you make a difference? Is South Dakota truly and in an important way better than it was when you found it? Because if you're not a contributor, you're a destroyer. Let's all be contributors. Let's be builders. Let's start the debate. Let's start the dialogue. Let's start the challenges. Let's fight the good fights. And when you all go home, let's be able to look everybody in the eye and tell them that the things that we put in place, the problems that we solved, the things that we funded, and the policies that we created will be the things that make South Dakota a better place next year than it was today. I look forward to working hard with you over this session and over this, my last year, to make South Dakota a better place than it is today. Thank you so much.